one?
Topic this week is it's kind of like a theme that I think, not unlike social media, I think it's kind of like a theme that we've kind of popped into a couple of times, and last week was for the first time where I think it really kind of raised its head, and that's when we're talking about immigration. Is because what I want to talk about is patriotism, or like patriotism, and like where basically I have a general discussion of whether this is a good thing or a bad thing when it goes too far, and why we're seeing the changes of definition when we're talking about this. Talking about this idea of patriotism, especially in this more like modern age. So yeah, this kind of came up for a while now, and we actually directly addressed the question last week. I think we asked, we gave basically our thoughts on what like national pride or what patriotism was. But like even before that, actually, like there was a, have I mentioned this in an episode? I can't remember actually. Like the thing that got me interested in this, like just like actually quite a few weeks ago, was that basically like in the UK, the government's announced a policy where they have to have mandatory a Union Jack or a Union flag, sorry, up at full mast, lol, for the entire day and night. Like it's no longer. It used to be like for ceremonies and like patron saint days would put the flag up, but now it's all the time. And
Wait, who has to have this? Sorry.
all government buildings. So if they're owned by the council or they're owned by the government,
Okay.
they have to have a flag showing. Basically, to announce that they're a governmental building.
Okay.
And this like kicked up a lot of like, you know, the usual like BBC breakfast news show hosts who bring in one person from one side and they talk about patriotism's bad, patriotism's good, and I just thought it was actually really quite fascinating how this developed. So before I talk about some of the like the viewpoints I saw, I guess like we should give a brief little descriptor of what our internal thoughts are before we even get into this. It's because you gave a brief descriptor last week, but we'll go over that again. Like for me, basically to sum it up, I think I went into this thinking like patriotism was a relatively straightforward concept. Like I hadn't thought about any negative implications. I just thought like, yep, I'm Scottish, proud to be born in Scottish. I like Britain. I definitely say I'm proud to be British. Like patriotism, tick, you know. And yourself?
Yeah, I think after last week's conversation, my definition of patriotism and pride in general has it's a bit more detailed now, a bit more
Yep.
updated. I would have also said that I was proud to be Scottish. I would say I'm definitely less proud to be British,
Interesting.
because I think that the reason I'm proud to be Scottish is because of I think it's because of the things that I represent with Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd represent maybe freedom, the ability to live freely and stuff like that. That seems like a very Scottish value, you know. The idea that in Scotland's history we've always been fighting for our freedom. You know, when the English came here, the Scots tried to fight them back. You know, our Scottish national anthem
Right.
is literally founded in the idea that we fight for our country
Sure.
and for our freedom. You know, that seems like a very Scottish ideal to me. However, I've also got this strange sense that I'm very proud to be ginger, which is a little bit different, and I guess it comes from the fact that I find that to be quite a unique thing about myself. You know, so maybe I think uniqueness is quite good as well. So I think it's to do with what you are proud of, and you sort of like aligning with the values that institution or element has.
You've absolutely hit it on the head. It's because when I was doing like my reading, there was one phrase that stuck with me, which I think really summed it up best of all, and that was basically that in order to feel some degree of patriotism or patriotism, I've heard both people describe it different ways. I don't know. You basically need to identify with some type of perceived national value. Right, so
Right.
and that's exactly like you said. Like Scotland, one of their like values, or like, you know, what we sell to tourists is like freedom, you know, and like more than just like these intangible identities. There's like ginger here. That is part of the Scottish national identity, you know. So like, it makes a huge amount of sense that you kind of have these values and you feel like I think it makes a huge amount of sense that you see these things, and it's just because, and you feel some type of inherent pride. It's because it almost is obvious when you think about it. It's like there is an aspect of my country that is a value that I personally agree with. Therefore, there is agreement with the views of the country, and that's kind of where patriotism is born. So I think it makes sense that like on the whole, most people in most countries are more patriotic than not, and that's just like, I think that's kind of a human nature thing, and that makes yeah, effectively that makes a lot of sense to me.
Now that we've spoken about that in a bit more detail, and we spoke about it in terms of immigration last
Right.
week, one of the things that I've never understood, but I've always let people, I've let people do it, but I've never personally understood, is like gay pride and black pride and things like that, because I've always seen things like race and sexual orientation isn't something that you are like you've not earned it. There's nothing about it that you've like gained. It's something that you've been born as, which is why I also never understood why I was proud to be Scottish before. But now I can see it. Now I can see people are proud to be black because, especially in America.
Right, exactly, yeah.
60, 70 years ago, they were slaves, and they've kind of fought for their rights. They've came up in that country, and now they're fighting to be sort of equal citizens. There's an element of to be proud in.
Yeah,
that you've elevated, your people have elevated themselves out of that. That's good. People that are gay that are trying to get like equal marriage and stuff like that, and to get equal rights in terms of being couples. It's like, yeah, you're kind of fighting for your people almost, and I can see why they would be proud of that.
I think it makes a lot of sense to have a sense of pride in your history, and this is what you kind of touched upon last week, and what you thought that it is a strange concept, because like exactly like you said, like it's not something you've done, but it's something shared among a people, and like either like a race or a country or something like that. So it's almost like a shared experience, which like is I think I almost find it hard to articulate, but like I understand it because I feel it, and it's there. So basically, like, I have these ideas about patriotism. I think it's a really good thing. But when I was like starting to research, I've realised, and I kind of thought this before, to be honest, but like people are in the UK particularly are becoming like a lot less patriotic than they have been in the past. Like, see, UK post World War II, like in the 50s and the 40s, it was like an extremely patriotic country. Like people used to like get the entire family around to listen to the Queen's speech at Christmas, and they'd like go out do all the patron saint the days like for school and stuff like that. Everyone would have a flag in their house. So like there's,
you can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like imagine winning a world war. That'd fucking be that'd bring you together, wouldn't it?
That was what I was thinking about. I was thinking about the immediate implication of your country turning around
save
and saying,
the world.
like not even like winning the world war, but also like saying no to fascism.
Right. Yeah.
To being like, the way that like what you're doing is hurting people, we are going to stop you. Then winning the war, like you would have been so proud.
It's
to be
extremely
British after
noble.
that, right?
Yeah, it's extremely noble. And like I can now understand, looking back, how people made like such efforts to like help the war effort. Like people stopped smoking cigarettes. People like started cooking with fucking spam every night. It's because like they wanted to do what was right. It wasn't just because their government was telling them, you do this, you do that right. It's because there was like a genuine pride for everyone else in that country and the interests of the country, and it was like this unified theory that everyone was pushing in the same direction, right? Which is just so like so amazing. And it's like, it's something that you and I
never ever thought about it like that.
Right.
The World War, never ever even, that thought never even crossed my mind. But man,
well, but that's the thing, like you and I, we don't live in that Britain, like
No.
I'm talking about Britain a lot here, and eventually we'll start talking about Scotland and Britain, but right now I just probably want to keep it at like the British levels, because like there's like patriotism, but then like how do you start dealing with patriotism when you belong to two countries, but anyway, well, we can work on that.
One of the things that we've just touched on there that now makes a lot more sense, have you ever had like, I don't know if you've ever had a grandparent on Facebook or someone who is old on Facebook who shares things like, you don't know what it's like to be in a struggle.
Right,
it's like pictures of like a war memorial, and it's like, you don't know what it's like to struggle. Because we never lived in a post-World War II climate, we never knew what that was like. We never knew how it was to be that proud of something. So maybe you can understand why like the older generation would like vote for the Union, or why they would be not against independence, and why they think the struggles that we face are so trivial, because they're proud to have been through those things, and we're complaining about things that they are seeing as like trivial issues. So that makes a little bit more sense.
And to add on to that as well, like remember that, see, like our oldest generation right now, like they literally were raised in the Great Depression. It was like a worldwide financial crash that had affected people in no way ever seen before, and there was just like, people were starving, and like this was, they are our golden generation. They're the generation that we are still called the golden generation. Like, people still say we've not had one like them, because they've lived in these like hardships and struggles, and seen the development of our country in a way that's just so difficult for us to fathom. So like, when it comes to concepts like patriotism and pride, we approach them in totally and utterly different ways. And I think what I'm starting to realize as well is that, see, the whole idea of being patriotic is now actually, as with most things in the modern world, it's got several more degrees of complexity now, as like language has become more modern, effectively. So like, and one of the biggest things that I think about, and when I started thinking about why patriotism had changed compared to what it was like back in our grandparents' days, was the idea of, I now know what it basically is, the idea of patriotism versus nationalism. And this is something that I didn't know the difference was before. I thought a patriot was a nationalist, but it turns out back in our grandparents' day, that's exactly the case. They were just like general words to use someone that was proud of their country. The idea that a patriot is someone that has love or devotion for their country and their country's interests. A nationalist is someone that has love and devotion for their country and their country's interests above all others. So basically, it's where we start introducing this idea of supremacy. And this is where, like, when it comes to nationalism, you start getting like British national parties and like skinheads and the Ku Klux Klan, and you start off, all of a sudden nationalism starts, it becomes like white nationalism, right? So like there's I think basically what I'm trying to get at here is that I think the whole concept of patriotism is actually been like besmirched over the years, because like we have these certain groups that have seen like changes in the country, like exactly what we're talking about with immigration. It's like people that think like to be British is to be white, and to see any reduction in that is us losing what it means to be British. So like, you know, you'll know yourself. Like I live in Bristol, which is like a super progressive place, but there's still certain pubs that I'll drive by, and I'll know there's gonna be a bunch of fucking dodgy skinheads in there, because it's like covered in bulldogs and fucking Union Jacks and all this like ultra British over the top imagery, and it's like, that's what you've done, is like you've fucked up patriotism, because like you're no longer talking about being proud of your country, you're talking about being proud of like your skin. You're like conflating this idea of ethical identity with like national values. So I don't know, that's kind of that, when we start thinking about why patriotism has changed, to me it kind of seems obvious that like just using, for instance, like using like a Great British flag, it's now like what folk think about that. You know, it's not just I've got a Great British flag because I'm proud of my country. It could be he's got a Great British flag because he's a racist. You know, there's this whole aspect here.
Yeah. There seems to be, well, from what you just explained, there is a modernization of what is going on here, and similarly to how we spoke about in the first week, we spoke about how like sex and gender are now sort of becoming different things. It seems like the same for patriotism and nationalism, where before nationalism was just a form of patriotism for your country, whereas now it's almost sort of been warped into anything that's different from the way I remember my country is bad, which is almost, it's almost turning into like racism, sexism, like homophobia in that instance. Because you're right, people that do wave the Union Jack now, it's seen negatively, you know, because it seems, especially in Scotland. In Scotland, it's definitely a bad thing to do it here, because I think
I'd thought about that.
Now people seem to represent bad values with that flag. You know, you're right. They maybe they represent, you know, racism because people are complaining about immigrants. Maybe they're thinking about homophobia because the gay rights here aren't what people think they should be. You know, they're thinking about transphobia because the trans rights aren't where they need to be. So there are a lot of like problems in this country, and because those things are like right at the forefront of discussion these days, they're represented in this flag sort of by accident. Almost.
Well, I definitely see where you're coming from. When I like this idea of like the flag almost representing now like it's almost as if like the public mindset has moved towards, like, if you have a flag, then you're by nature excluding others, you know. And the idea is that excluding others, like, we don't want anything else, keep it as the way it is. So I can understand how this like negative association has been put onto the flag, especially by the fact that like it does seem that it does. Unfortunately, there's like a tendency for like these really racist, homophobic, horrific people to use patriotism as a guise to they're convincing themselves that what they're doing is like the right thing, but in reality, they're literally just like short-sighted, racist people. But they're like
The flag's almost a shield.
but they are hiding exactly. They're hiding behind the flag and using that as an excuse to like they'll say that we are preserving British values, and it's like you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're just using that as an excuse to be a racist and get away with it, right? So like
yeah,
that's that almost seems like the most obvious one to me. I think when I think about kind of the perceptions of how pride in your country has changed now, because it's no longer just a simple issue of I'm proud to be Scottish because Scotland has done a bunch of great things. It's like it has connections with everything that everyone's aware of in the country right now. You know, it's like there's too much homelessness. Well, you're fucking proud to be you're proud to be British, are you? But we've got too much homelessness. You know, isn't that a problem? You know, like, that was actually probably a second talking point that I saw people use when they were talking about why they don't want to be patriotic, or why they think patriotism is becoming like out of fashion effectively, because like some people basically came at it from this angle that being patriotic is like hypocritical, because the idea is that you're denouncing that like we are proud of who we are, we've got a great country type of thing, but at the same time we're like underfunding the NHS. So they were like, why the fuck are you wasting time worrying about patriotism when you've done this to the NHS and when you've done that to homelessness, or why there's this much inequality in the workplace? So like there's also like another sect of people, I think, that when it comes to thinking about national issues, I think the problem we're having here is that we're conflating national issues with like governmental issues, right? Because like you can be proud of where you're born and like the country you're grown up in, and the colour of your hair, and that doesn't fucking have anything to do with who's in government right now, you know?
It almost comes back to something that we've just spoken about when we say that people tend to focus on the negative of these things, you know? Britain may have problems, and by God it has them, but there are a lot of good things about this
right,
country.
exactly,
you know?
yeah.
When we're like, you know, the NHS is underfunded, we're like, okay, but at least healthcare is universal.
Sure,
you
right.
know? Anybody can walk into a hospital and maybe the waiting time's a bit bad, but you'll get fucking seen and you will get the treatment that the government pays for to do that, you know? You think about America, you know, if you walk into a hospital there, you're shitting yourself for the bill.
Exactly, yeah.
You're shitting yourself for the receipt that you're going to get on the way at the door.
Yeah.
You know?
You spent 3 hours dragging yourself here to
about
avoid an ambulance call.
Yeah, you're talking about how there's a bunch of homeless people here, and I'm like, yes, the homeless problem could be better, but the average quality of life in Britain must be so much higher than it is in a lot of countries around the world. You know, we talk about how there are a bunch of people that are like racist here, and there are parties in government that try and stop immigrants and stuff like that. But as we've seen last week, the current legislation allows anyone in the EU that wants to come and work here a visa to do
it's
so.
It's quite reasonable, actually.
Yeah, that there are a lot of things to be proud about this country. And, you know, I started off this conversation saying that I'm more proud to be Scottish than I am British, which is still true. I think that Scotland holds more of the values that I align with than Britain does. And especially because they're so opposite when it comes to like the party that's in government. They're so opposite on the things that they want to do. But there is an element of being of being proud to be British that I'm now like seeing. You know, it's having universal healthcare is right up there.
Sure.
That's right up at the very top of the list of things that I'm proud that Britain has.
Free education for uni students. Well, in Scotland anyway. That's the Scotland one. Shit. Yeah. That. But
that's a great one.
A brilliant one.
No gateway to higher education, and you know we can see that there is still problems because, as we discussed again, our school was the deprived area, and there weren't many kids that went to university. But at least the kids that could go to university did.
Well,
you know,
that's the thing. Like I think this is exactly this kind of warped view of patriotism. It's because like see people. I'm telling you, man. Like see the people that were saying like I don't want. How could I sit there with a straight face and say I'm a patriot when there's so much wrong with this country? It's like this was a view that many people had. They're coming to breakfast shows and they're talking about how there was like problems with what was wrong in the UK right now. And from my perspective, it's like you're just like these people are clouding and like just obfuscating what it means to be patriotic. It's like they're tying in separate things. Like, for me, I think that like patriotism and pride in where you're from and your country is like timeless. You know, I don't think, well, it is obviously to an extent, you know, but like I don't associate that with who's in power. You know, I don't look back at the last 4 years of laws that we've put into place, and that's what I base my patriotism on. This is something much more eternal than that, or something like, because like most of the pride comes back from the history of the countries I'm living in. You know, like it's not these recent things. So yes, I think there's like a huge aspect of like negativity suffusing the viewpoints that are happening out there, and that's probably where we're seeing, to an extent, why the general opinion of patriotism is going down. It's because like these days there's so much more information out there. People have so many aware things. So there's like, you know, how can you be hypocritical and say these points? But but the other point was that it's not just people doing this for the sake of negativity. Now I said like people came on these like breakfast shows, and like they were talking about how, you know, like how could I be patriotic because there's still inequality in the workplace. When I was watching these people talk about what patriotism was, it was so obvious to me that they came on this morning show to slag the Tory government. You know, they weren't actually there to talk about what patriotism was. They were just looking for this for some way in order to get their own views in, right?
I'm telling you, man, there are a lot of people on news right now that just go on to slander government, and it wouldn't matter who was in charge. You know, just because people just love complaining, people go on, they say, "Oh, how shit's the government?" Right? And people go,
"Yeah, well done."
Well said. You're so brave to come out and say that. But it's almost so strange for them to do that under the banner of like patriotism, to like make you feel bad for it, because like they'll say something along the lines of, "How can you be patriotic because of the homelessness here?" And it's like, you realise if you had this opinion in China, you'd be put in prison.
You would lock your toes right now.
You can't speak out against the government in Russia.
Right, exactly,
Doesn't that make you a little bit proud to be British, that we at least have some freedom? Like, there is something about this country that is better than like a dictatorship. The fact that you can have this free speech, that you can even say that, like, that's something to be proud of. Off the bat,
exactly,
you
know? It's something that people are just so blindly unaware of. But like, it does kind of highlight the one thing about the idea of patriotism that I do understand the negative of, and that is that political parties, I think there is potential to use patriotism against the people. So like here, that example, like I just said, is the obvious one, where it's like it's people that are left leaning, like being like slagging the government effectively because they're not seeing the policies in place, and they're blaming that and saying that I don't want to be patriotic because of that policy change, right? But like, also the right do it just as bad. It's because like I was looking at examples of where the right basically abused patriotism, and it's like, see, during like the whole Brexit thing, the people on like the right side that were like trying to get people to vote for Brexit, we're basically saying that like people that wanted to like stay in the union were like unpatriotic. So, and like they were just like,
they're anti.
Yeah, exactly. So like there's this like aspect of patriotism where politicians are undoubtedly able to like weaponize it, I think, but
and they say stuff like "keep Britain British" and all that stuff. It's like, okay, what is that?
Yeah.
Are you saying white?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Exactly. It's what we talked about with like immigration, isn't it? It's like, how do we're starting to confuse issues here. Like, we're talking about patriotism, but there's a bunch of people that just hate immigrants. You know, like, these aren't patriots. You know, like, but they're voting the same thing. So there's like, I definitely understand how as a result of how like the definition of what patriotism and nationalism has become conflated, there's much more confusion, and I think that must have led to like the waning opinion of what patriotism is. It's because like, you know, we're talking about it right here, and I still agree that patriotism is just like a generic love for the interest of your country, and love for your country and its interests. You know, I don't think there's anything deeper to it.
I don't think it even is restricted to your country, though. Patriotism like isn't about where you're from, right? It can be other aspects of you.
Right? I don't know actually. But it's the same, and like, as actually said, it's like we've got like nationalistic pride, we've also got gay pride, you've got this pride, you've got Scottish pride, you know, like these things are effectively, I don't think any different from a form of patriotism. It might officially be a different word.
No, patriotism does mean the quality of being patriotic, devotion to and vigorous support for one's country.
Oh, okay, but it's the same. I think it's basically the exact same aspect here. So like, it's not a it's not a particularly damning or like an offensive view. You can understand why like 90% of Brits say they're patriotic or said they're patriotic at one point. So it's just like, I think it's really fascinating that they've like got such a drastic shift in opinion compared to like the younger generation and the older generation right now. And I genuinely believe it just comes down to like the use of language. You know, it's like things have been warped, and you've got association with like particular groups, and yeah, it's a shame actually. I think it's because it's what we're talking about. This idea of patriotism, like from my perspective, I don't have any like empirical evidence on this, but to me it makes sense that like for a nation to survive on its own, you kind of have to it would make sense to have patriotic people, right? That must be beneficial for a nation. It's like, if we're going to the extreme, take the example of World War II. You had these people putting in work for the work effort, and they were doing that for the people in their country. They were working like as a unit in order to achieve this goal. So from a country's perspective, or a government's perspective, sorry, it's like beneficial to have high patriotism. Does that follow?
Well, they would align. If you want your people to be patriotic, because they will align with the values that your country has, right? So you know your country wants to achieve certain things. You know, obviously the governments that you elect will want to achieve slightly different things.
Sure.
But the values that the country holds, you want everyone to hold them, so that you're all working towards the same goal. And just as a quick aside, I just googled nationalism as well, and it says identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, but it also has at the end of it, especially to the exclusion or detriment to the interest of other nations.
Right, so kind of the supremacist, the aspect of being above.
So nationalism does have a sort of negative connotation with it, and you can see why people would think that. But yeah, to go back to that, I think that it's ideal for a government to have a patriotic nation, because they should typically be aligned with what you're trying to do, which would only make them, happy. Keeps your popularity up, stuff like
right. So that's exactly what I've been thinking about this, is because like also this whole aspect of like patriotism and stuff like that, it's kind of like come about because obviously like the Brexit happened, so like that's going to have. This is like when I kind of go off the books and start thinking about the kind of the results of, I think, this conversation, because it's like to me it seems like, and we're kind of agreed, that patriotism is like going to be really beneficial in keeping your country productive and like unified, is the way I look at it. I think it's like a good glue, because it's like a common ground that people have a shared experience, or at least a shared history. So like we are now going forward into Britain being completely a part of the European Union, and in certain ways our country is going to be much more on its own and free acting. So to me, it would seem highly beneficial for us to try and develop more patriotism. I guess that would be through the act of pushing national values to a higher degree, and for instance like adding flags to buildings, these small things, just more flags about the place to try and form some kind of cohesion. It's because like this is the topic we started at the very, very beginning. It's because for us, patriotism isn't quite as simple as saying you like your country, don't like your country. It's because like we were born in Scotland, right? And Scotland is part of Britain, but there's like lots of people in the UK and Scotland and like England and Wales, and they'll have like completely conflicting views of either their home nation or the Commonwealth as a whole, or Britain as itself, and I've kind of been thinking to myself, and I don't know whether this is true, but surely this like patriotism we're seeing, where like I'm proud to be a Scot but not to be a Brit type of thing, isn't that just like going to cause division? Can you be proud to be British and Scottish? Is that a thing?
Yes, you can be. I think there are probably a bunch of people that think that Britain is diverting so much from its patriotic values that they are now saying, that there's a reason for them to be proud to be Scottish but not British, because they think that maybe England and Westminster, for example, are going so far from their patriotic values that they no longer recognise with it, if you know what I mean. So the reason that I think people probably wanted to stay in Europe is because the values that they align with more align with the European Union. It's almost like we're seeing the government straying from that, if that makes sense. So there's like, I wouldn't say that to be patriotic and to have values as a country, your government doesn't have, like, they're not determined by your government.
No.
They're determined by the people.
I think so.
So the people almost become unhappy when they think the government is misaligning with what they perceive to be patriotic. So basically the only country that voted to leave the European Union was England. You know, I think all three of the other countries voted to stay. And it definitely seems like England is the country that also doesn't like immigration. You know, all the bad things that we're seeing about immigration are coming from England. They are a right-wing government. I think they might be the only of the three countries that elects a right-wing government. So you can see why there would be division in the other three countries when all three of those countries think that the UK is diverting from their patriotic values purely because England is doing that, if you see what I mean. So there's almost more division between Scotland and England because the perception of the direction the country is heading in is bad for Scotland, but is good for England. So Scotland, that's why they had the independence referendum, which they lost, but it's why that gained so much traction, because they're saying, look what they're doing. That's not what we believe in as a country, sort of thing. And it's the same for Brexit, whereas, you know, people in England thought a certain way about how the country should be run. The English government then said, well, we can do that on our own, or we can keep doing this. And the people went, well, we don't like this. That doesn't align with what we think. So we're off. You know, we'll just do this other thing. You know, so the government is also is kind of, they should be attempting to align with the patriotic values, and when they're not, the people get unhappy.
Yeah, there definitely has to be like a degree of like pushback from the populace, because I agree with you. I don't think the government has enough control to like change what like the values of a country are. Really, well, saying that, do I? Because like, one of the things, like the few bits of evidence I actually did read for this week's discussion, was basically talking about how in England the levels of patriotism are lower than every other country in the UK. And like in England, more than other countries, there's kind of a stigmatism of like having an English flag, you know, because it's like, oh, what, people would make fun of me for putting up an English flag. There's like, it's basically, of all the UK countries, English people, I think it seems to actually be the case that they feel the least represented by their government. It's because at least we have the Scottish government, and like, we're encouraged to be proud of Scottish. It's because it's fucking, it boosts the tourism industry at the end of the day. Like, fucking wear kilts at your wedding, people love that. You know, like, buy as much iron brew as you can, whiskey for fucking days. That's like, and these are like ways that we get to celebrate our national value. And it's the same with Wales. You know, like, they have like native dress, they have languages. Like, we have Gaelic. You know, that's something that's Scottish to its core. You know, so I kind of feel that we actually have ways of expressing what our national identity is. But like, England, it seems like it's actually in this scenario where there's like, it's almost like England and Britain are like too closely related, and like, by saying that you're proud to be like British or English, it's like, it's just seen as a bad thing. It's because, how to describe this, like, it seems to me that England's basically been like, England and Britain, because they're like they're very, very similar. Those two concepts have just been like painted as the bad guy, you know. So it almost feels
that's why it seems to me that this is like a poor. What you're talking about, the flag, that seems like a poor timing thing. Well, you're correct that they should probably be pushing patriotism. They should probably be looking for people that are patriotic. It almost seems like the flag is like poor timing, because it is perceived to be so bad at the moment. Like, the people look at the British flag, the Union Jack, and they see something that's bad. So it's almost like, well, you should have tried to correct the perception of what that flag was before you push something like that.
I get that. Yeah, okay.
It's like such a transparent gesture of, oh, everyone's British, guys, and it's like, well, that's a negative feeling right now. Why have you tried to push that in this like time frame? You should have corrected that before you said, let's fly the flag, because nobody wants to fly the flag.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Like the flags thing almost seems like they went the wrong way round. They've tried to address problem by looking at the outcome instead of the input. Because I agree with you that there needs to be, like, Britain, the government needs to address the dissatisfaction that citizens have right now, and it seems like in England that's like higher than the rest of the countries, and it seems like it's leading to this fracture among Britain itself, like and this is like the fact that I was when I was reading that, I saw that like England had like higher rates of higher rates of dissatisfaction and like lower outlooks on patriotism, and didn't you mention that they were also the ones that voted to actually leave the EU? So like they're the ones that seem to have a bigger problem with what they perceive as values and like misrepresentation by their government. So it feels to me that, yeah, like the government needs to come up with a way of addressing this and effectively just like trying to, I guess, I don't know, it's a hard one. Like, how do you make people happy? It's because the way I look at it is that we should be encouraging people to be British and to be proud of British, and that'll like that'll form a degree of cohesion, because there's so much division right now. But like the government at the same time is also like actively, at least the Scottish government is actively saying that be proud to be Scottish. So you've got this kind of like these two things here. I don't know how you reconcile them. Or like, you've got the government like be proud of the country that you have immigrated from, and like of course you should be that, but it's like the lack of the government saying but also be proud to be British. That I think it would be a hard step to take. It's like, how the hell, if we're talking about trying to keep the country together during like Brexit, because this is going to be the hardest time the country's went through in quite a while in terms of division, how do we move towards that right now?
There's a lot of that. I think the problem is there's a lot of this, like patriotism, keep Britain British, be proud to be British, be proud to be Scottish. That's all getting flown around at the minute, but you've no idea what people are perceiving that message to mean.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You have to turn around and say, this is what Britain is. This is what Scotland is. Scotland's a country that highlights freedom. We want people to be free. We want people to be happy. We want them to have choice in the things that they're doing. And then when you get someone who is just these racist people who are using patriotism or nationalism to say the things that they're saying, they turn around and they say, well, immigrants shouldn't be coming here. It's like, well, if this country is all about freedom, that doesn't align with the country's values. Like what you're saying, like, isn't patriotic.
Yeah.
You're just like that doesn't align. So we have to make it more clear what the values of this country are, so that people can align with them better. Because you're right, it is now used as a weapon, where you have like the national parties and you have UKIP and stuff like that are saying keep Britain British and vote to keep your country, and you have Trump in America who's saying make America great again.
Yeah.
And that platform seems to be run from let's make America what it was, but America's always been a country of immigrants.
Right, well, exactly. Yeah.
So it doesn't even make any sense that they want to stop immigrants, because it's like that's what we've always been. It seems like the problem isn't the fact that we want to be patriotic, it's that people don't know what patriotism is anymore, or at least they've kind of warped it to suit their own needs, and it's changed in a lot of people's minds, so that across the country's political spectrum it means something different to everyone that says it.
Well, I do think that the government is actually at fault here, because I think it should be part of like a government's policy to promote what your country stands for, and like actually relatively recently the British government did come out and actually officially state what the British values were, and they were pretty reasonable. Like one of them was free speech and freedom to do what you want to do. Other one was like upholding lawful practices. Another one was like given to lessers, and one of them was like inclusion. Like these were very great, unarguably good things. Another one was like education or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but they were just like good concepts that I think really highlighted Britain throughout the past. But it's like, why haven't we been teaching that, you know, and why have we not been pushing that?
Why isn't that being pushed? Yeah, because I can almost guarantee that about 5% of people heard that announcement. And these are the people that keep up actively with politics anyway, so they already know what they think, you know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, one of the comments I read was basically that it feels like the people of Britain are just being like forgotten, you know, or like what it means to be British has been forgotten. And this is like what makes this difficult to talk about is that starts moving into like the nationalist territory, where it's like Britain's not Britain anymore because it's no longer as white. It's like, no, that's not the case. Britain is no longer as white, but that's not what I'm talking about here. It's like this pride of what we are, or like acknowledgement for the past, is just not as pushed the same way that it ever has been. So it almost makes sense as being like a degradation of this like national identity. And see, to be fair, at the end of the day, like every country has like sins that they're not proud of. Every country, you know, there's like, and Britain certainly had an inglorious past, just as everywhere else. But like, it seems that after talking about it today, it seems like there's just like a huge amount of negativity on this topic, and like people using it for nefarious means in order to like come across a certain message. But see, to be honest with you, man, like I'm pretty sure most people are pretty patriotic. You know, I'm pretty sure of it. Whether it's for like Scotland or Britain, you know, I think there's probably some confusion there. But it seems to me that most of the people that are like, why do you want to be patriotic? They're just like either looking for the negative and like latching onto that, or it's literally just politically motivated. You know.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. You know. Especially here in Scotland, you know, from our perspective, there's a lot of people that want to be independent, and there's a lot of people that hate the Tories, and I can almost understand it, because Scotland never votes for them. You know, Scotland hasn't voted Tory for like, I don't know, 30 years or whatever it's been, since whenever Margaret
exactly.
was Prime
It was just
Minister,
Maggie Thatcher.
Like, I think it pretty much has been Labour and SNP since then, so it's been left leaning since that last time they voted for Margaret Thatcher, and because of that, they just feel like they don't get the government they vote for. You know, their views aren't being represented, which is true. You know, well, I wouldn't say it's true, because they have their fair share of MPs,
but
in
I know what you mean, though.
But that number of MPs doesn't necessarily get anything done, because there's so few of them in comparison to how many England have. So I get it. I can see why you would be unpatriotic, but all these people see is that all they see is the fact that England votes Tory and we don't. You know, they don't see the good things that are still happening across the country, you know. And it becomes its most divisive when you hear people talking about how the Tories want to privatise the NHS and stuff like that. Like,
these are things that matter to us, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of fight back when we see them starting to mess with things that we truly believe in. And, you know, I think now that we've spoken about it, I almost want to be independent more, because I think, like, you know, Scotland doesn't really get to decide what happens in the UK. You know, at the end of the day, if the entirety of England votes for something, it doesn't matter what Scotland, Ireland or Wales do, because that's the majority. And I'm not even complaining about that, because Scotland voted for that majority in the independence referendum. You know, they voted to be a part of Britain, which is why I think it's so hypocritical that people complain about the government when Scotland voted to be in that government. You know,
but I mean, to move on to like referendum talk, I suppose. Do you actually think that the people of Scotland have a radically different opinion on legislation than the people of England?
No,
well,
probably not. I mean,
that's the thing.
I don't think, like, to be honest, the left-leaning and the right-leaning government in this country probably differ on some things, but I find it difficult to believe that over a 4-year period much changes anyway, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, when the Tory government were put in, and I bet you if during the next election a Labour were elected instead, you wouldn't feel changes. You know, and your day-to-day life wouldn't change. So at the end of the day, it maybe isn't that big a deal anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the way I look at it. Like, I've never felt like so that's exactly why when it came to like EU versus referendum, like I voted differently, because like I can understand feeling that the views of European countries don't necessarily represent you or your country, but I've never felt any divide in, like, there's always, like, Scottish people slag English people and English people slag Scottish people. That's like will continue till the end of time. But I've never felt generally such a difference between like England and Scotland to ever feel that there was any necessity in Scotland going solo. But I suppose that's kind of like by the by in terms of this conversation. I guess like just one of the things taken away from it was those, like, I agree with all of the talk we've had about patriotism, but I struggle to figure out how we're going to coincide this idea of like British patriotism with our home country patriotism, like Scottish patriotism and British. It's because, like, I don't know, it's a hard one. I don't understand how they can both exist. Going forward, it's
There are definitely areas in which Scotland and Britain align, right? There are
undoubtedly,
areas
yeah.
in which the values of the countries will align, and that's where the overlap happens. The areas where they don't align are the areas where disagreements happen, and you start to feel more inclined one way or the other. I think from this conversation, like, it's fine to be patriotic. Like, you can be patriotic, and if you're proud of where you come from, don't let anyone shame you for that. But you better be aware of why you're patriotic for it, and you better be aware of what your country's values are, because I think it's just one of those things where it's like, if you start opening your mouth about something that you don't know about, then you start to look like a fool pretty quickly. You can be patriotic if you want. Just know what those values are. Know that your country agrees with them, and know why they're good.
Yeah. I suppose by my own logic, given the fact that I don't see a huge amount of difference between the Scottish and the English government, there's no real reason for me to think that the idea of patriotism and to be Scottish and be British cannot coincide with each other. Like, there's those things have happened for hundreds of years up until now, and there shouldn't be any reason going forward. I think that the reason, exactly like you said, like, it's just such an interesting issue, because like these are topics that are becoming people are becoming much more aware of it. We're living in a world where basically everyone has a clue about politics now, and like you have like so much access to information, and these like old-fashioned ideas of patriotism, they require further thought than they've ever required before. Like, it was one of those things where it's just like a blanketly positive term, and now it's one of those days where, like, if you do like have a big Great British flag, it's almost as if like you should expect someone to say like, why the fuck you got that up there, and like be able to defend it, which I don't necessarily think that that's a good thing either. Like, I think that might be bad, but it is the state that we find ourselves in, right?
I think there's an element of people being proud to be British, the people that are using it as a shield for like racism and homophobia and stuff like that.
Problem.
But I think there's also an element of the people that'll stop you and say, why are you proud to be British, pointing at the flag and stuff like that. If you came up with 2 or 3 reasons, good reasons, as to why you are proud to be British, they would crumble. They wouldn't have the argument. They're not expecting you to have a coherent argument about why you are proud to be like that. They just look at it and they think, there's homeless people in Britain, well, they hate immigrants and stuff like that. Like, if you told them the laws on immigration here and the number of immigrants we get and the good that they do, they wouldn't. These people won't have an argument, just be able to like back up what you're doing, because there's probably a selection of people that also fly the Great British flag as a I'm putting the flag up. What are you going to do? Sure.
Yeah.
There's an element of people that put it up as like provocation as well. So,
but I think like what you're talking about there, just like having cohesive thoughts about why you want to put that up on your wall in the first place. That isn't that the whole concept of like reclaiming flags. Like these things get taken away by like national groups, and then over time, enough reasonable people are able to reclaim that symbol that once meant something else, and like we were able to change the perception of it by, exactly like you say, just having a bit more of awareness and having thoughts to these relatively short-sighted arguments, and that is eventually how we'll find ourselves in a place where this association of people that are racist with country symbolism, like we'll hopefully be able to dissociate these things and reclaim these things back effectively.
Yeah, I think when the government announced this policy to put the flags up, it would have been really beneficial to to release it alongside a sort of news bulletin or a publicised event where they put something along the lines of, this flag will now be flown at all government buildings. This flag represents freedom, equality, all of the things like that. This is what this flag represents. This is what Britain is, And someone who's using this flag as like racist ideology or whatever, will look at that and they'll see the word freedom, and that doesn't necessarily align with what the ideology they're pushing, So maybe highlighting what it stood for would have taken away some of the stigmatism about flying it in the first place,
I guess the problem is that I have absolutely no doubt that they probably did that. It's just that when it was picked up by news outlets, it was like, here's why Union Jacks are peeing around you all of a sudden type of thing, like it's I'm sure that there would have, however this information was first disseminated to people, would have made a bit more sense. But that's not how I heard about that information in the first place. The way I heard about it was someone going, you hear about the flags, and like they certainly want to start telling me about the reasons that the flags are up there in the first place. So you're right, there needs to be more of a push on the reason of their actions, and unfortunately it was one of those things where the timing didn't work out very well, and it was picked up and it was kind of like picked apart, and but I do believe there's a way forward though, and by having a bit more awareness of these issues.
Yeah, so by all means be patriotic, but just know the values that you're proud of, know how your country uses them, know how your country aligns with them, know what they're doing to do that. Don't fly the Union Jack and like not expect to see criticism, but know how to answer it at the same time, Just be a bit aware, really, of what it is to be prideful of something and why you are prideful of it, I guess.
Yeah. I think, to be honest with you, that's probably summed up both of our topics this week pretty well. It's like having a degree of awareness. It's because it's both of these issues that we've had, where I'm talking about patriotism and how it's kind of developed and kept going on a new meaning, and how you're talking about kind of like obfuscating like the art compared to the artist. Like these are like phenomena that have become clouded just given like the age we find ourselves in, and like things like social media and like the news outlets and stuff like that. So it's, I think once like I said, it's one of those things where things have just gotten so complicated now, and you need to take a second to figure out exactly what it is you're looking at.
Yeah, and so many people are giving their opinion on these things, and their opinions of them are either wrong or slightly factually inaccurate.
Right. Yeah.
The opinion of the mass. When someone says these things about Britain, they're saying that Britain is bad, and that's just kind of like spreading, when in reality maybe it isn't like that, but it's slowly becoming fact or it's slowly becoming believed fact because there's so much of it going around.
Yeah.
Just do a little bit of like critical thinking, be aware of what you're seeing, and be aware of what other people are seeing, I guess. And it all comes down to a little bit of self-awareness at the end of the day. Self-awareness of what you think, how you should be thinking about things, and awareness of what other people are doing at the same time,
Yeah, and not even other people, just like the things that are happening around you. It's like you see that flags are being put up at local government buildings, or you see an article about it. Think about why that's happening. There's probably a good damn reason about it, because then someone spent money. So it's an interesting exercise, and it'll probably, if you end up doing that, it'll probably bring you down one of these crazy rabbit holes that you and I find ourselves on every week, where you end up finding a bunch of new information that seem obvious now that you've had an opportunity to discuss it, but before it was just like trapped away in the depths of this particular conversational area. So yeah. So that's me this week.
Yeah, and that has been episode 6 of Guide to 21st Century. Thank you guys for listening. If you kept on listening, please feel free to put a comment at the end of the video, on the YouTube video. We will have these up on Spotify and iTunes soon. Lewis is actually, he's coming back this weekend from Bristol. He's coming home. So I think we're going to do, we'll probably we'll get all that organised like on Friday at the weekend. And hopefully have all these things up and running. But in the meantime, if you want to leave a comment, maybe subscribe, like the video, do all that good stuff. It helps us out a lot. So yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.
Bye.